When we think about rules, we usually see things in black and white, right? You're either following them or you're not. But what if that's not the smartest way to look at it? Let's explore a more nuanced and honestly, a more effective way to measure compliance. So let's just start with a question that might seem a little odd at first. Is getting a perfect score always the best possible outcome? I mean, with regulations, we just assume 100% is the gold standard. But as you're about to see, the data tells a much more interesting and, frankly, surprising story. At its heart, this is all about a fundamental shift in how we think. We're moving away from an old, really rigid all-or-nothing system, a world of absolute yes or no answers, and we're moving toward a new one that sees compliance in levels, that acknowledges there are shades of gray, and thinks in more relative terms. To really understand why this shift is so important, we first need to dig into the problem with the current pass/fail approach. The system most places use right now, it's basically a simple light switch. It's either on, meaning you're in full compliance, or it's off, meaning you're not. There's no dimmer switch, no way to see if you're almost there or if you're completely off track. It's a total all-or-nothing game. And this system, which is technically called nominal measurement, can lead to some outcomes that are, well, just absurd. Take this example right from the source material. A rule requires 6 hours of training. Okay, so an employee with 5 hours fails. But guess what? An employee with 0 hours also fails. In the eyes of this system, they're exactly the same. All that important context is just gone. So, how do we fix this mess? Well, we start by embracing a more nuanced view. It's time to start thinking in shades of gray. First, let's just put a name to the old system we're trying to leave behind. It's called the nominal scale. Its entire world is just based on a simple, absolute yes or no, compliant or not compliant. End of story. The solution is to adopt what's called an ordinal scale. Now, instead of that simple yes-no, this system uses gradients, or levels. It lets us measure compliance in a relative way, and it finally recognizes the huge difference between almost meeting a standard and, not even trying. Now, this paradigm shift, it doesn't happen all at once. It really involves a few key steps. First, you just have to ditch that simple yes-no model. Then, you introduce gradients to capture those different levels of compliance. And this is crucial. You also have to factor in risk, because not all rules are created equal. And finally, you connect all of this to what actually matters, real-world quality. Okay, so all this theory leads us to a really practical tool. Let's meet the hero of our story, the Regulatory Compliance Scale. This is the Regulatory Compliance Scale, or RCS for short. And instead of just counting up violations one by one, it organizes them into these logical buckets. And by doing that, it gives everyone a much clearer, more meaningful picture of what's actually going on. And here's how it works. It's actually a lot like a report card from school. 0 violations, you get an A for full compliance. Makes sense. 1 to 3 minor violations, that's a B for substantial compliance. And as the number of violations goes up, the grade drops. It's simple, it's intuitive, and it's so much more informative than just a raw number. Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating. The research uncovered what they call a sweet spot. It turns out that facilities with substantial compliance, that's a B grade, remember, often had better quality outcomes than the ones with full 100% compliance. Let that sink in. Striving for absolute letter-of-the-law perfection wasn't always the path to the best results. So, does this new scale actually work out in the real world? Is there proof? You bet there is. Let's look at the data. So, when researchers looked at the data the old way, just a raw count of violations versus quality scores, they found a total mess. There was no clear pattern, no predictable link between the two. Being more compliant didn't necessarily mean higher quality. It was just confusing and not very useful. But then, they applied the new scale, and boom, suddenly it all made sense. This right here is the aha moment. Check this out. As compliance improves from low to medium to substantial, the quality score goes up. That's what you'd expect. But then, look at full compliance. The quality score actually drops. It's lower than substantial. That is the sweet spot in action. Wild, right? So, what does this all mean? It means the new way brings amazing clarity. By grouping violations into these common sense levels, that messy data suddenly makes perfect sense. A clear, predictable relationship between compliance and quality finally emerges from the noise. And this isn't just some academic exercise. This new way of thinking has huge practical implications for the future of how we handle regulation. So, for example, one idea is to create a public-facing report card, just like the ABC hygiene ratings you see in restaurant windows. The system could use simple colors, from blue for full compliance down to red for very low compliance, giving the public an at-a-glance understanding of how a place is doing. It also gives regulators a clear, data-driven framework for making those really tough decisions. For instance, a facility scoring 98% or higher gets a full license. Somewhere in the middle, maybe they get a provisional license. But if they fall below 89%, no license. It makes the whole process more consistent, transparent, and just plain fair. The big picture benefits here are just enormous. This new model combines safety and quality into a single, coherent system. It makes monitoring way more efficient because it helps focus precious resources on the areas of highest risk. And maybe most importantly, it finally moves us beyond that crude, one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. And that leaves us with one final thought. This idea is so much bigger than just one field. It's pretty universal. So the real question is, what would change if we measured more things in our world, in our work, our policies, maybe even our own lives, by their substance and not just by the strict letter of the law? Something to think about.